This is like a super fun topic for me to talk about anyway. It was such a cool project to get to be a part of and to see everything that was kind of going on there. It's super exciting. Both what kind of the history was and talking about that, but also what it might mean for some of the things going forward and what's going on there. It's definitely a really fun topic. I can actually just start giving some background now while it comes in. So, as probably almost everybody has heard here, maybe a little over, oh my gosh, just barely over a year ago, the government of El Salvador, announced that they were thinking about doing something with Bitcoin. And then actually, it was maybe a little less than a year ago, it was in June of last year that they actually formally passed the law around it and got things started. So it's amazing to me that it's been less than a year since this has been kicked off. So, a little bit of the background even here. So, they passed a new law in June of 2021, and, then they gave themselves 3 months to implement it and to get everything live. So, definitely not a timeline that you usually hear from government, more like a timeline you hear from a startup founder. But unlike a startup founder, they actually hit that deadline, which is absolutely crazy as well. It's something that was available to all Salvadoran citizens, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. And they, as a way to get adoption of this, because they believed it was important to get people in the country into this, they actually gave $30 worth of COVID relief to all the citizens in the country via the Chivo wallet. So, what drove their decision to do it? There was a variety of things that really drove the decision around it. Financial inclusion being a big part of it. Only about 20 or 25% of Salvadorans have access to banking or other financial services before the Chivo wallet was live. Currently, right around a little less than a quarter of the GDP of El Salvador is actually remittance from other countries. And so, if a quarter of your economy is coming in via remittance, even a few percentage points coming off of that actually affects the entire economy of your country. And so lowering remittance fees was a high part of it. Fostering innovation and also changing the story around the country was an important aspect of it as well. I think if we would have been standing at this conference last year before they announced it, and I would have said, what do you think about when you think of El Salvador? Either people would have had no opinion or they would have talked about MS-13 and gangs and violence. And now when people talk about El Salvador, they talk about, innovation and leaning into the future and things like that. And that's an incredible rebranding for a country to go through. And then increasing foreign investment, increasing tourism, those pieces were really important to it as well. But I can't express enough how much just that piece of changing the vision of the country means. And I can tell you, having spent, much of the last year down there, you can feel it in the people. Like their internal vision of the country has changed. They didn't think about themselves as an innovative country before. They actually just had their first startup exit last year. A company called Ugo sold to a German company for about 150 million, right? And so the timing was really good around this from that perspective as well. And then they're also looking to grow tourism, business travel, foreign companies there, et cetera. So what were some of the, we'll get time for questions at the end, I promise. What were some of the challenges that came up? The timeline was crazy. Imagine, I think it would be hard to find 10 people at this conference that you could put together and say, we're going to launch an exchange for 5 million people in 90 days and have that all come off really well. And instead of that, if you put like 10 of the very best people in any government to do it, it's insane, not because they're not quality people, but because they don't have the background, the education, the experience, and everything else. So that was like a really crazy stake to put in the ground and to move. The scale is a second piece of this. So, again, if you think about even big companies, when they roll out a new product, they roll it out to a few people, they test it, they run it for a couple of weeks, they watch it, they run all kinds of metrics around it, they revise it a few times, and then they roll it out to everybody. This was like a light switch at midnight, where the president was on TV telling people to go and download their Chivo wallet and get on it and go live. And so there was just this wave of people coming onto a platform the day that it went live. And then, finally, and this is something that played into our piece, The $30 bonus they were giving out to people, that's like, 10% of monthly GDP for a Salvadoran. They have about a $4,000 annual GDP there. So $30 is a significant amount of money. Not surprisingly, when you're giving away what's a meaningful amount of money, there's some people that would like to take some of it that's not theirs. And so, there was a dramatic number of fraud attempts that were coming on in the network. At some periods of time, there were by a lot, more fraudulent account creation attempts than real ones, as they tried to test the system and find places to get through. So what is it that we do? Some of you may have heard me talk yesterday, but our company does customer onboarding, KYC, AML, biometrics, sanctions, watch list screening, all those pieces of bringing people onto the platforms, and then securing those accounts and identities. So in addition to doing the customer onboarding piece, a number of our clients integrate our biometrics and liveness and things like that as a way to maintain account security. So either if a user is doing a high-risk activity like changing the password or doing a high-value transaction, they may use us again at that point or other places along the way. And this is all based on tools and technology that we've built and developed. So what did we do for Chivo? We do two things for them. Well, we do a handful now, but these are two primary areas. One is onboarding of all of the new customers. And again, this was really massive scale. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And doing the onboarding for them. One of the things that's been great about the relationship there is they've been happy enough with the work that we've done that they've kept finding new places to build us into their app to do more pieces. So now we're helping them with automated account recovery, phone number changes, password changes. As people escalate levels of their accounts into new areas, we'll help with that and things like that as well. And then, in terms of general, what we're doing is, in terms of some of our differentiation, and really for them as well, was around fraud prevention. So working in digital assets and cryptocurrency, as you'll hear from FinCEN and a number of other places, they'll tell you that when you're working with digital assets, it naturally is a higher risk category as a result of the cross-border nature and the fact that things, can move relatively fluidly. And so while most of our clients don't have a fraud problem, those that do, it's frequently the Chinese mafia, the Russian mafia, state-level actors, cartels, et cetera. We can beat those professional organizations. So let's get into some of the things that are going on in El Salvador today, what's happening there, what are some of the initiatives that are happening, and what does that mean for the future? So as we talked about, everybody in the country has a wallet today. About 80% of the adults have signed up, downloaded it, installed it, and used it at least a few times. And more people actually use it every month today. According to the worst estimates out there, more people use it every month than the entire banking system. So, they've done a really good job of growing and adoption and usage, and it's bringing in these other pieces as well. So, for financial inclusion, before Chivo, over 70% of Salvadorans had no financial access. Just through Chivo, over 80% of adults do today. And so it's really driven financial inclusion, and it's lowered remittance fees dramatically, right? And, to see a place where there's a country where there are, for the majority of people, the first time in their life that anyone in their family held an account balance was in a digital asset. They never held one in fiat. It was only ever in Bitcoin or a digital place. And that's really a transformational event. Also, you're seeing the investment and innovation happen. You're seeing a ton of digital asset companies that are setting up regional headquarters and investing and hiring in El Salvador. And none of them would have been doing that before they went into this digital asset economy. And some of these are relatively big names. And that has obviously a direct impact on the economy. Like basically anyone that's working for any one of these companies is a top 10% income earner in the country. Right? And so these are all really high-paid jobs. But what this means generationally is there's now a whole bunch of people that in this generation for the first time are working for startups and entrepreneurial environments. So they're getting the on-the-job education and training that's going to let them start their own companies in a few years. And so it's actually a way to seed an innovation and entrepreneurial environment inside of your country. Tourism and economic growth, there's been increases in foreign investment, and actually there's been dramatic increases in tourism. Tourism is up about 30% inside of the country, and a lot of it is related to the digital asset stuff and investment they're doing. And there's early stuff happening with real estate development around it. Obviously there's been sales of homes for digital assets already, but now they're starting to do, fundraising. They're looking at NFT-based stuff, honestly, I feel like the NFT-based is a little bit more promotion and gimmicky around real estate than real value. But the next step of that is securitizing that real estate, right? And doing other kinds of tokenization behind it. And so that'll be, I think, what's coming next behind it. And then one of the things I want to go back and highlight about what's happening there, because look, if you give somebody $30, it's easy to get someone to take their free $30, but that doesn't create an ongoing user. And what we all need, so that there's going to be an economy or an environment we can all be successful in, is people that are used to using these things all the time. And so the government has actually created incentive programs for people that are using digital assets for payments, specifically Bitcoin. And so, like, if I go to a gas station today, I can get 20 or 30 cents off if I pay with Bitcoin. And they actually built a $10 million pet hospital, where if I go into the pet hospital and my dog is sick and I pay in dollars, I pay the normal veterinary fees. If I go in and my dog needs surgery and they send me home with prescription medicines and everything else and I pay in Bitcoin, it's 25 cents for the entire thing. And so, pet owners tend to be very loyal to their animals. And so it's a great way to actually encourage recurring usage and recurring patterns that will create the habits that we all want people to have in using their digital wallets and digital assets there. And then, I don't know if any of you saw the announcements, but earlier this week, El Salvador had the heads of the central banks and the financial regulators of 44 countries. 44 countries come to El Salvador this week to talk about using Bitcoin and digital assets inside of their countries. Now, obviously, not all 44 of those countries are going to adopt Bitcoin in the same way, but if 4 of them do, it's an amazing change in the landscape of what we're doing and what we're working on. And what does this mean for all of us, right? We now have one country in the world, where the majority of all adults use a digital asset wallet. They have one, they can log into it, they're familiar with it. As a matter of fact, they're more familiar with it than a credit card. They've used a digital asset wallet, but they haven't used a credit or debit card before. And so, as we look at additional services that may get rolled out, real estate investing, NFTs, yield generation through less risky mechanisms, perhaps security-based, and other things, this is a market that's fertile to do that. It's actually one of the few places where if you put up a billboard advertising a digital asset service, it's actually relevant to almost 100% of the people that drive by that billboard. There's nowhere else in the world where that's true. And so I think we're going to see a lot of services that spring up there, that the learnings that happen inside of El Salvador are going to be able to be carried to other countries. And frankly, it's a pretty inexpensive place to invest because the costs aren't that high there to work. It's not a giant country and other things like that. And so I would really encourage a lot of companies that are working in digital assets to think about if there's opportunities for them to trial balloon products there, build teams there, and do things like that because of the environment that's being created there to create fertile ground. I wouldn't assume everything is the same there as it's going to be in Europe or the US or other things like that. There's big economic differences. But it could be years before we get another country or another population that has that dense of an access of digital asset wallets and digital asset usage. And I think all of us should take advantage of that from a learning perspective.
What about the private company that actually owns Chivo and how they're making money? It seems to me like Chivo could be, a lot of people deposit Bitcoin into their Chivo wallets, and that company actually has the ability to rehypothecate and make money on it.
Yeah, I can tell you. So the company behind it is wholly owned by the government, and it's not designed to be a money-making organization. It's designed to provide service to the people of El Salvador. How they handle and what they do with the reserves, honestly, is outside the scope of the things that I see. I would have no idea. Yeah.
I say this as a former software developer and an early Bitcoin adopter. Does Bitcoin have a mechanism to keep the tech stack current enough to keep up with the scale that you're talking about if this thing does spread worldwide?
Lightning Network is actually a pretty good architecture for that, and that was actually, and I'm happy to talk about this maybe outside and to spend some more time on it. But El Salvador was basically the first enterprise adoption of Lightning Network, and certainly in the very early days of it, there were like a bunch of rough edges in a ton of places, like everything from like the way addresses were formatted being slightly incompatible between wallets. One wanted a capital letter, one wanted a lowercase, right? Those kinds of things, to channel liquidity not being high enough, right? If you can think about it, probably before Chivo, there were maybe like 10,000 developers using Lightning, and then all of a sudden in one day there were 1 million people using it. And so, there were definitely some scalability issues that came up in the early days there as well in terms of channel liquidity and size and scope and those kinds of things. That all got resolved super fast. It was actually really impressive how quickly those issues got resolved. So, look, I think any time right now, because we're in the 1996 or 1997 of the internet, anytime a massive project gets turned up, we're probably going to feel some pain. Right, we saw it happen on Ethereum. We've seen it happen on Ethereum, where a massive project fills up. We feel some pain for a little while, and then it goes away. Right, so we're going to constantly be finding corner cases and edge cases, particularly around scalability with crypto networks for years to come. But I think that what we saw in El Salvador with the Lightning Network specifically is they were able to pretty quickly overcome those scaling challenges, and the manner in which they did it doesn't cause me concern that it's going to be limited at the next scale up. Yeah.
Knowing what you know now, if you were to go back in time, like imagine I sent you the time machine back to make the implementation, like do the project, what would you have done differently? What are the learnings that other people might carry in the massive adoption?
Yeah, I mean, so like one thing I would say, so we weren't the center of the project, right? So I can't speak for the whole thing. But some of the things I would say is, look, almost every one of the major vendors that was originally selected was swapped out, including us, right? And so I think that there probably could have been a little better work on upfront vendor due diligence. But again, I say that the people were given an impossible task. Right, I think everyone in this room can say if we were told we have to launch something in 90 days for 6 million users, it would scare the hell out of us. To try and do it, it was a real challenge. And so I don't want any of that to come across as being critical of the people that were doing it. I think they were, like I said, given an impossible challenge, and I think they did an amazing job with the challenge that they were given. But I think a little bit better vendor selection up front could have been better. I think thoughts about maybe not rolling it out to 6 million people in one day could have made things a little bit easier. I think there could be better on the ground end user education, both around digital assets, around financial literacy, around keeping yourself from being scammed. Before this, if you think about it, it was an entirely cash economy there. But when I say entirely cash economy, when I got out of an Uber, I paid the driver in dollar bills, right? Like I didn't even know Uber had that functionality, but they do in El Salvador. And so it was a super cash economy. And so if you think about before this, if you wanted to scam a Salvadoran, you had to walk up to them, right? And so like the skills you need to learn to protect yourself from being scammed if someone has to do it face to face are really different than online. Right, and so there could have been some better education there, and I think there continues to be a need to do some of that kind of work. Other than that, I think honestly much of it went quite well. Right, I mean, right now there's according to the worst estimates by an opposition newspaper, if you dig into the numbers, they tell you there's actually more people using Chivo every month than there are using the banking system. Right, and like that's a pretty impressive place to be, even if that's what your detractors are saying about what you did. They don't frame it the way I framed it when they talk about it, but that's what happens when you dig into their numbers. I think that there's definitely, and I can't talk about it, there's some interesting things on the roadmap that I think are going to be further enablers of the country and its citizens there. And so there's like an ongoing vision behind what's going on that I think is really interesting. Yeah, I think maybe give 120 days instead of 90 days. Maybe a little bit better vendor selection on the upfront part. But other than that, I think they've on the whole done a nice job. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, like when I talked about the government incentives, and I need to get off, the time's run out, so I'll talk about outside after this, if people have more questions. But even the government incentives they kept up for like Chivo Pets and that, it's not if you use the Chivo wallet if you get the incentive, it's if you use Bitcoin. And so if I show up and use my Bitcoin Beach wallet or my Moon wallet, I get exactly the same incentives as someone who's using the Chivo wallet. So the government is not trying to monopolize with Chivo. What they're trying to do is say, the financial industry had 30 years to provide services to the citizens of El Salvador, and they didn't. So we are going to provide the baseline service. And our hope is that private industry comes in and completely kicks our ass and kicks us out. But we want to ensure that all our citizens have access to basic financial tools and the ability to be able to do online purchases and to more cheaply and easily receive remittances and payments and things like that. So there's already competition in the market. Actually, many of the people I know in El Salvador have 2 wallets. They have Chivo and they have something else. And it's actively encouraged. Cool. I'll take anything else out in the hallway so that we can